Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from Winter's Day, Winter's morning in New York City. I am back in the States, and the first heavy snowfall followed me over here. We have an Arctic push. It's very cold. Such is life. In this world of being a local and global citizen, you get to experience all manner of ways of weather. And today, my guest is joining me for another Returning Champion episode. He joined us when he first relocated to Accra. I think it was about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, early on. And so let me get to his bio, and then we'll get into this great conversation that brings us up to date with what he's doing. He is a human rights leader, reparatory justice advocate, and development communications practitioner with almost 20 years experience working with national and international development, human rights, and grant-making organizations in Africa and the United Kingdom. He's regional director for Africa and the Middle East at the International Fund for Public Interest Media, IFPIM, where he's leading the organization's grant-making efforts to support independent media. He is also the founder of Reform Initiative, LBG, an organization working with policymakers, political leaders, and affected communities to advance the cause of reparatory justice for historical crimes against Africans and people of African descent. When he last joined us, he was founding director of the Africa Transitional Justice Legacy Fund, ATJLF, based in Accra, Ghana. And prior to ATJLF, he worked at the International Secretariat for Amnesty International in London as Deputy Director of Global Issues and head of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights team. He has served as Interim Country Director for Amnesty International Nigeria and as a West Africa researcher. He is Rotarian, a Global Atlantic Fellow, and an Obama Foundation Leader for Africa. Makmid Kamara, welcome to the podcast, or welcome back to the podcast.
Yes, greetings. I'm so happy to be back. Thank you very much for having me again, Florence.
Yes, I'm happy that you're able to join and make time in your busy schedule. You have been in a whirlwind, and I love that's what you're doing now. And so let's get started. Let's jump right in. Where are you from? If for those that don't know or don't remember, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
I'm from Sierra Leone. I currently local in Accra, Ghana. But actually, even before I get to that, I'm from Sierra Leone and I'm also from Freetown. I don't know if people are familiar with the city Freetown, but we'll probably come to that in terms of its historical relevance to the work that I've been doing on the reparatory justice end, but also on my work on supporting public interest media in the continent. Currently, East Legon in Accra is where I am local. My craft, I think I'm an all-rounder. I consider myself an all-rounder. I tend to help with strategy building, movement building, making connections with people and places, making connections with issues, and working with movement to ensure that we advance African issues for African people wherever they find themselves.
We need as much help as we can to do that and be that for ourselves, with ourselves. So let's dive into a little bit started hinting at it, but let's talk about the why, the where. So you initially moved to Ghana to start a new role. Let's talk more about the why, the where of your transition from your former role to your now role.
Yes, so it's been a journey. I think the last time we spoke, it's now how many years now? Because it's been a while. And
yeah.
I think at the time we had actually just organized the first Accra Summit in Ghana. And then I left ATGLF in 2023. And around that same period, I founded Reform Initiatives. Just after that, I got the job with the International Fund for Public Interest Media. I have been really enjoying the transition, and it's quite hectic. It has been quite fulfilling for me professionally, and in the sense that I get to do what I enjoy doing. I started my craft and my career as a journalist, and now I am working with the world's first multilateral institution established to support public interest media to become economically resilient and viable in low and middle income countries across the world. And my portfolio is Africa and the Middle East. So you can imagine the excitement and the challenge that comes with. So that's what I've been currently doing. And the organization I founded has been also continuing its work on advancing the reparative justice agenda alongside other movement leaders in the continent and outside. So today, I think it's good to hear from you. Which hat do you want me to put on in this conversation?
Yeah, yes. I want you to put on both new hats. And I'm so excited to learn about your work in public interest media because I think we are kindred souls in the understanding and desire to see more and better and for intergenerational Africans and Pan-Africans. So tell us more about what the organization is about, how it came about.
So the International Fund for Public Interest Media came about because a very experienced veteran and well-respected journalist called James D wrote a blog just lamenting on the lack of a special fund to support independent public interest media globally. There's a fund for malaria, there's a fund for tuberculosis, there's a global health fund, there's a global malaria fund, there's different funds that are been established with cause political and global buying to support and address a major global problem. Yeah. And this is not a question of delegitimizing or reducing the importance of this fund. What he did was to just use that as a yardstick to say, well, we have all of these funds, and these are all issues of public good. Public interest media is a matter of public good. Why shouldn't we have a fund that ensures that we protect this public good, which was still facing an existential threat, an existential crisis for its survival? Of course, a number of people saw that, but the other person who's the co-founder and now CEO of the fund saw this and took it as a challenge. And then together, a feasibility study was resourced and supported to just get a lay of the land as to, firstly, the appetite for such a fund. Secondly, to understand fully what the major issues are that if a fund of this nature is sort of what they could address, and what are the challenges and the context in different countries and which geographies the fund could even start to look at. This led to the launch of the fund, but prior to the launch, a lot of political mobilization was done. And we have former President John Kufuor, who even wrote the foreword of the feasibility study. We have endorsement from Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. We have high-profile endorsement for the need to create a mechanism of this nature to support independent public interest media globally. And then the fund was actually launched by a colleague of mine who used to be the managing editor of the Mail and Guardian in South Africa, Khadija Patel, and she actually launched the fund at the UN headquarters in New York. And since then, the fund was able, prior to the launch and even after the launch, the fund was able to raise $60 million for its initial pilot phase of what we call the proof of concept phase, right? And with that money, the approach that the fund used was to ensure that it established a very lean secretariat and structure. And that lean structure is led by a CEO, but then governed by thought out and carefully selected board of experts. So we're talking here of Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize winner from the Philippines, Mark Thompson, who is current CEO of CNN, globally respected journalist. We have from the continent, Nanjala, Nyabola. We have Gina Chua, Professor Julie Setzi, and others who are members of the international board for the fund. So it is a well-crafted, highly respected and revered collection of people and experts in the field, media space, who serve on the board. And then, of course, a team that comprises regional directors for the various regions. We work in over 40 countries at the moment. And in Africa and the Middle East alone, we have 13 countries. And we recently added 2 more and following the board approval, which will actually increase to 15 countries for Africa and the Middle East. And we have a small team, but that small team has been able to do wonders in terms of the amount of money that we've been able to deploy to independent public interest media outlets in all the geographies of focus. So what we do is we give core flexible grants. The reason why we give core flexible grants to independent media is because we are aware that this is drawing from feasibility studies, drawing from our interactions and expertise in the space, that there's a lot of media capacity building interventions, a lot of trainings for media outlets and journalists in low and middle income countries. What was missing was the actual resources, the hard cash, to ensure that when these people are trained, they are able to put into practice the expertise that they've gained. And that when these media outlets send out their journalists to go and train, the journalists will come back and actually do proper independent journalism or public interest journalism. They will not be lost to whether it's the PR field or other outlets who are able to pay them. We found that, and again, from the feasibility study and from conversations with media owners, publishers, editors, that the media lacks money to protect their editorial independence. As a result, they have been they are susceptible to capture political and other corporate interests who can give them the money, but direct them to a particular agenda. So this has a lot of impacts, negative impacts. Firstly, it leads to the decline of people's trust in independent public interest media. It leads to the hemorrhaging of staff and quality journalism. So a lot of the good journalists will not stay because they are not, the profession is unable to pay them. It also leads to the inability of these outlets to do in-depth investigative work that will hold power to account. And as such, they're losing their numbers. And when they lose their numbers, advertisers will not advertise with them. So the advertisers will opt for independent or individual influencers rather than traditional independent public interest media who are doing. And but apart from the loss of audience, advertisers also get scared if they are engaging or working up with an outlet that is either being funded or supported by a particular political party or interest. In all of these, the media was or is at the losing end. They're losing quality journalists. They're losing quality outputs because they don't have the money and the resources to produce and good quality. And good quality journalism is expensive. They are losing audiences and they are losing credibility within the public. For us, we believe that in as much as training and capacity building are very important and are crucial to maintain the standards and quality of independent and public interest and media, money is crucial.
Yeah.
So we give the hard cash to these outlets and give them a leg room of multiple years, some 2 years. And when I talk about money, the grant sizes that we give range from $70,000 to up to $1 million. But the average is around 250, 290 over 2 years. And this money can be used to pay staff salaries, to hire or retain your journalists in your newsroom, to diversify your economic streams, your revenue streams, so that you don't rely on only one source to feed the production cost of your outlets, and to get these outlets to think of new business models that will ensure that they are economically resilient and that they also operate within the context that is fit for their purpose, and they're not doing the same thing over and over again. Our grants are flexible in that sense. So we don't give grants that tie you to the production of X amount of content on this issue. We give you money that you can use for the running of your operations and for the production of high quality journalism, which holds power accountable, which connects your audience with the news content that we produce, and but which also ensure that you attract more audiences that you will then use to attract advertisers and revenues, because we believe that an economically resilient independent outlet is a critical and crucial player for the strengthening of democracy, and also the protection of the media ecosystem in which they operate.
Let's talk about sustainability, because I think that is the key challenge, right? Following the money. Where does it come from? How are you seeing new models, particularly for this public service content, be funded, right? Because traditional media was an advertising model. Even new media is an advertising model. And you're also suggesting an advertising model. So what actually is a new way for us to be able to evaluate, and then figure out different distribution channels that might return different economic viability for independent?
So what we're supporting them is actually to look beyond advertising as the only means of revenue generation. And there have been successful examples from some of the grantee partners that we have in Lebanon, even in Ghana here. So one example of an outlet that we support in Ghana is Joy News, which is the multimedia group. And we became the first funder to give Joy News a 2-year grant. Remember, Joy News is a commercial station. So that is one unique aspect of our grant making as well. We give both profit and profit outlets. In fact, not just, we also give outlets that are hybrid in nature. And we do this because we believe that the news making aspect of journalism and those who produce or work in the field have to think business, have to think of the business of journalism from a commercial and revenue making lens, and not just as a charitable enterprise. Because nobody's going to pay for the good quality work that will hold power accountable, that will ensure that public's interest is served by the media. And remember, the media is considered as the fourth right arm of government. So they represent the voice of the general public. But they cannot do that in on an empty barrel, right? They need money to self-sustain. So what we do is to unlock new sources of revenue and then redeploy it through grants, but then use that grant to ensure that the outlet themselves start thinking of other forms of revenue beyond their traditional routes of making money to self-sustain. So the examples I'll give is where outlets think of partnerships that will bring in money, partnerships for events, using new and emerging technological tools to generate money online and offline, and just go into business kind of models that will ensure that they don't rely on one source of income. So we don't have a solution that we are marketing. We are actually funding them to experiment solutions that will work for them based on their context. We are not coming with a prescription. We are coming with a mechanism that will enable them to find their own solution to the problems based on the context, based on their markets, and based on the needs of that market. So our role is more facilitative rather than prescriptive.
So this is all very current in my mindset, because I finished a concept note for what I'm calling the Pan-African Creative Trust Fund. And the idea is to fund educational, informational content creators to develop what is the equivalent of, say, the Sesames of the world, like Sesame Street, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's the concept. And it carries across the Pan-African diaspora. And so when I think about particularly content for educational purposes and for children, the biggest nut that there is to crack is the idea of what is that business model. You mentioned these endorsements by governments, and traditionally there's been some kind of government give that has supported it, but the model in the US has shown us that we cannot rely on that. And so in terms of reaching the people, are there any innovative ways that you're seeing your grantees actually getting deeper into local communities and into different segments that are allowing them to have different types of visibility?
So our partners are really experimenting a broad range of ways to engage their audiences, to engage with the communities that they serve. Many of them told us that prior to the grant, they didn't even know the demographics of the audience because you did not have the tool. So basic things like Google Analytics to understand who your audiences are. And this has always been the problem that has led to the disconnection between an outlet and the audience itself. And we know how important the audience is. There's no media without an audience. Now, so one of the things we've been supporting is where they get the money to actually procure some of these tools for audience understanding and metrics. So that is the first one. The other one is where they engage, they hire. So the newsrooms are changing. The listening and media consumption patterns are changing globally. How do you match up with that change if you don't have people in house who can connect with the audience, understand trends, and help you produce content that will enable you to not be disconnected with the audience user. So some of the outlets that we've supported use the money to hire young people. For those of us who've been in the space, those of you who interact with the media is quite male dominated, age wise, you have people who are on the other side of it. And so young people are either creating their own platforms because they don't feel represented in the newsroom or they're not in the newsroom, which means there's an elongated stretch, there's an extension that means people produce stuff that nobody watches, nobody reads, right? So some of the outlets, what they've been doing is firstly hire young people in their newsroom, or even creating like a digital unit that has an intergenerational or diverse expertise. And as a result of that, their numbers, whether online, whether it's on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, increased because people are able to see, okay, people are able to see themselves in what is being produced. And some are able to monetize that number in ways that fit them and fit their purpose. Another example is in Tunisia. So you know how the space in Tunisia is in strong, is a comprehensive attack on media and civic space by the current government, and a lot of media outlets are either closing down or some are actually going exile. What we do is support these outlets to firstly continue their work, whether in exile or in Tunisia, without relying on a mechanism that will shut them down. So the money that we give them enables them to keep paying their staff, to produce things like podcasts, which are then embedded in there, whether if it's a radio, and how radio is still popular in the continent. So using different ways to produce content that is not necessarily traditional, that is not monotonous, and that appeals, resonates with the audience. In the Middle East, we saw an increased number of audience figures for our grantee partners who have been covering issues related to the conflict in Gaza, the conflict in Lebanon. And because they're able to have a regular stream of income from the grant that we give them, many of them, while others were forced to retrench and lay off staff, many of our grantee partners were able to keep their staff. And these staff members were able to keep reporting and producing content that audiences in the Middle East or in the diaspora needed to understand what was happening in their communities, which means that the number of their followers, their listeners, their readers increased exponentially when we look at the figures across different regions. So we've been able to keep the lights on for a lot of our grantees who, this is with the risk now of sounding very boastful, who without our funds would have actually shut down because of course the withdrawal of different other funders in the media space. And we did the fund is unique, not just in how we give grants, but in the people we give and the ways and we need in which we engage with our grantees, but also at a time for our existence. The fund is operating at a time when many of the established media funders are repurposing, they are moving away, they're moving from being independent media to funding other things that will not offend political establishments. So we are stepping in. One example I will give you is our work in Palestine. We decided to support independent media and outlets in Palestine at a time when almost everybody who was working in Palestine was closing shop, was turning a blind eye, and the journalists were being constantly attacked and killed, and media houses were closing that. That's when we gave our biggest grant. In fact, we gave 1.2 million to Palestinian journalists across the entire country, from the West Bank to Gaza, so that they can continue reporting what was happening in the region. And for us, this is something that we're really proud of. And the same for our partners in Lebanon, in Tunisia, different other places. We are currently working with grantee partners in Senegal who are doing amazing work. And in most of these initiatives, the French-speaking countries often get left out. So what we did in the last year was to ensure that we paused all grant making from all the regions so that we purposefully give preference to outlets in the French-speaking countries in the continent. And we're very pleased now that we have grantee partners in Senegal, in Cote d'Ivoire, and in all of these places to ensure that they benefit from this financing mechanism for independent media.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that story. And so how does the fund sustain itself? You talked about how the grantees are looking at sustainability. How does the fund, what is the trajectory for the fund?
This is now where I actually have to make a pitch for the fund to get more funds
Okay.
so that we can give more
Okay.
funds.
All right. Let's do it.
The fund gets money from multiple sources. We currently have about 18 to 20 different funders. And of these, at least 10 of them are government funders, and the others are all philanthropic foundations who believe in supporting independent public interest media in low and middle income countries. I told you that when the fund started in our first phase of operations, we were able to raise $60 million. Now we have a target of raising $130 million to increase the number of grantees, because we are moving out to our scale-up phase. We recently held a high-level conference on information integrity in Paris on the margins of the Paris Peace Forum. And I'm super excited and pleased to report that for the first time in the history of this mechanism, or perhaps any similar mechanism, we have Ghana as the first African country to actually financially contribute to supporting the fund. So not only has Ghana agreed to host the first regional headquarters of the fund, they've publicly committed to supporting the international fund because of their belief in information integrity and the important role that independent public interest media plays in the strengthening of democracy. So we have Ghana now as the first and only country, and we hope that other African countries will follow suit. But we've raised a lot of political capital, and which we are now in the process of transforming into financial capital to ensure that the fund has the required resources that we will redeploy to independent media outlets across the world. We are currently in a replenishment phase, which will continue into the new year. And we're doing a lot of outreach to institutions, to ethically responsible high net worth individuals, and to ethically responsible corporate institutions who believe that independent public interest media is a crucial player for the sustenance of democracy, for the restoration of public trust on the fourth arm of government, for holding excessive power or all powers to account and prevent the excessive use of political power, to connecting the public with power holders and policymakers, and for ensuring that even some of the other things that we value, whether it's public health education, whether it's climate change, whether it's gender, you need the media. The media should not be an afterthought. The media should be central player in the advancement of all these other groups, all these other public groups. And that public interest media is actually public good that should be respected, resourced, protected, and promoted, but primarily resourced to ensure that they continue to do the work that is required for a viable democracy.
Yes, indeed. So that's a great pitch. And we'll have all the links in the show notes. So this is something that I think we can all get behind. Thanks for joining us for part 1 of my conversation with Makmid Kamara. Be sure to come back next week when Makmid tells us more about his social entrepreneurship journey with reform initiatives. As always, you can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com and wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, I want to say thank you so much for being with us on this journey. We are at 300 with Local Citizens, and I look forward to more and more conversations over the coming years. As we move into 2026, I'm wishing you all a very, very safe and blessed and prosperous new year. As always, until next time, bye for now.